on your left, Frank Skarren, 5-1. Is it Drake's on your right? Dylan Donegan, Sultai mid-range. Nothing out of either player's main deck looks all that strange, except Dylan is main decking 2 copies of Assassin's Trophy. People are leaning pretty hard on things like Cast Down these days as a cheap removal spell because of the drawback of Assassin's Trophy, but interesting to note Dylan putting a lot more emphasis on the versatility rather than the efficiency.
Skarren was on the play here after opting and shocking with the Steam Vents. He had to turn to Terramander for Donegan. Merfolk Branchwalker is going to draw him a land on his second turn. Back to Skarren. He's going to opt again. Here's an attack with a Terramander. Dylan Donegan to 19, and there's a second Terramander.
Yeah, Terramander really giving basically a breath of fresh air to this Is It Drake's deck. No longer do you have to play Arclight Phoenix to have that raw strength. Terramander acting not only as an early threat that turns on Charted Course, which you're usually already playing 4 of, but as the game progresses, just turns into effectively a Tombstalker. And to start off for 1 mana, having that versatility and being so good early and so good late is just such an insane card.
Donegan draws a pair of lands off a Jadelight Ranger and actually has to discard Watery Grave to hand size. And back on Skarren's side, there was an attack with the Terramanders, and Crackling Drake shows up to the party.
Yeah, I'll tell you this much. Dylan Donegan wants removal spells. You can play all these Branchwalkers and all these mini creatures and gain as much life as you want, but eventually these Terramanders are going to turn the corner, and Frank Skarren's going to start attacking for a lot more damage than life gained by Dylan Donegan.
Yeah, it was a reasonable turn of events there as Donegan deployed Wild Growth Walker and immediately explored with Merfolk Branchwalker, gained some life, and Skarren could just attack with the Terramanders, left the Crackling Drake home. So that one was a blocker as Donegan attacked with the 3 Explore creatures. The Crackling Drake went ahead and ate the 3/2 Branchwalker. Skarren actually down to 12. And here's a Hydroid Krasis for X equals 3 post-combat.
Yeah, and notably the Hydroid Krasis rounds down. So Dylan only drawing half of 3, which is rounded down as 1. And it shows you just how good Hydroid Krasis is. This is kind of the bottom tier of where Hydrocrassus is going to be cast, and it was still pretty good. A 3/3 flyer that gains a life and draws a card for 5 mana. I mean, what else do you want?
Pair of ops for Skarren. His graveyard is now just the playset of ops in his deck, and he's going to hang his creatures back. That 3/3 changes the texture of the combat a bit.
Yeah, and I believe Frank actually has something like Dive Down at the ready here, but doesn't want to tap out, and waiting for Dylan to tap out here. Then he's going to start activating these Terramanders and continue holding up these really powerful instants and sorceries.
Here's a Branchwalker and a Jadelight Ranger for Donegan. The Wild Growth Walker now has 4 counters on it. Donegan going to gain a bunch of life there.
I think we were having a bit of technical difficulty here in the middle of this match. Hopefully that gets fixed, but of course, as a time shift to match, we'll just say he's at infinite.
Yeah, I believe 28 was the number that was flashing when it went away. And here's an attack with the Walker and 2/2/1 Explore creatures, a Jadelight Ranger and a Branchwalker. Skarren's actually going to put a Terramander in front of one and a Crackling Drake in the other, and he'll go ahead and level the Terramander, and Donegan's creatures just get eaten while the Walker knocks Skarren to 7.
Yeah, and Dylan just trying to throw away creatures here to deal chunks of damage because he knows once these Terramanders get large, there's a chance that Frank's able to attack in one fell swoop and deal all those 28 points of damage.
We're back over to Skarren, so now he has that 4-power Crackling Drake, 1 5/5 Terramander, and 1 1/1. Nothing on the main phase, though, and he actually just passes back with no attacks, back to Donegan's side.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance Dylan just overwhelms him with creatures. Frank looks like he's sitting back on a bunch of instants and sorceries and is just unable to really play much defense. But Dylan here opts to just pass the turn instead of attacking with his Swarm. Just going to load up and hope to get him in one attack.
Yeah, shocked for an Overgrown Tomb. Got that life right back off of an X equals 5 Hydroid Krasis. Content to hang back with this massive army. Back over to Frank Skarren. He's going to cast a Discovery.
Important to note, Frank and his cohorts playing the same strategy are all playing 1 copy of Blood Crypt as that Black Splash to help them cast Dispersal in a pinch.
Amusingly, the hit for Dispersal will be Jadelight Ranger currently.
Right, and with Donegan still with quite a few cards in hand, it's definitely a downside. But the times where you get to play Dispersal and bounce Lear Dawnbringer, really makes the Blood Crypt worth it. But it also gives you effectively a mountain that is able to cast the front half of Discovery. So it has merit.
Crackling Drake rumbles across. Looked like the hit was for 5. Donegan went to 23, and then Chart a Course drew Skarren 2 before Lava Coil took care of one of the Explore creatures on Donegan's side. Now we're back over to Donegan. Ravenous Chupacabra is trying to take something down, but Dive Down will protect it.
Yeah, and if you notice, this is lethal, I think.
There's a big attack.
Ooh, maybe. Okay, so Frank's got to line up some blocks here. I think he has to chump the Wild Growth Walker. He gets to eat either the 3/3 or trade, and then he's going to take 6 down to 1. So he actually has to trade, chump, and take 6.
Yeah, and he actually gets to bounce because he dived down on the Terramander, and it's a 7-power Walker. So he gets to maintain that, but he's in rough shape. As you mentioned, at 1 life here, facing down 5 creatures to his 2. And Donegan at 29, he's gained a ton of life, 18 life off that Wild Growth Walker.
Yeah, and now he has Crackling Drake and Enigma Drake, I think large enough to actually trade with that Wild Growth Walker right now. So Donegan here going to just chunk in. Looks like it's going to be lethal. Didn't have the shock to take care of that 3/2 Merfolk Branch Walker.
Yeah, and Donegan knows that it kind of gets worse over time there, forces Skarren to have the shock. Skarren doesn't, and Donegan's up a game.
Important to note, you saw there at one spot, Dylan chose not to keep a Vraska's Contempt on the top of his deck, understanding that Frank's hand likely full of things like Spell Pierce, like Dive Down, that are going to protect those creatures, just looking for more ways to progress this side of the battlefield and try to get in those last few precious points of damage.
Sideboarding here. Frank Skarren, he's going to want a little bit of health. It's actually a pretty interesting matchup with how you want to sideboard here because your opponent's playing a bunch of creatures, but also they have a number of haymakers. So in Skarren's sideboard, he has some options to go bigger as a lot of what he has that he's brought to the table. Treasure Maps, Rail at Viceroy, Niv Mizzet Perun. Some options that he has that seem more appealing here. He has a pair of Disdainful Strokes and a pair of Entrancing Melodies. Entrancing Melody is something, we've talked a little bit about how cards interact with Hydroid Krasis, and Melody is one of those cards that actually gets against Krasis in a really good way because the CMC for that card is always just 2.
Right, and the X thing with converted mana cost always confuses people, but that is something you always have to keep in mind. The only time X is a part of the converted mana cost is when the spell is on the stack. So you can Disdainful Stroke it if the X is 2 or higher, but you can also Entrancing Melody it for 4 because when it's in play, it's just green-blue. So I think those Entrancing Melodies are a big part of the Izzet Drake's sideboard plan here, but they're just so good against Krasis. But they're also a great way to take a large Wild Growth Walker, which could be the primary damage source from the Sultai midrange decks in the early turns.
Yeah, definitely. And it is a matchup where, as you saw there, Donegan just chipped in. There was just a ton of attacks with just small creatures before he got online with a large Wild Growth Walker, some Hydroid Krasis. A lot of times there is incentive for Skarren to just answer some of the early creatures, as you mentioned, being able to metal the Wild Growth Walker. That's actually a pretty big hit for Skarren.
Yeah. Turn 1 Sulphur Falls here, not ideal for Izzet Drakes. It means that either Mountain is the other land, which it is, or even worse scenario is you don't have another land, or the other land is also Sulphur Falls.
Yeah, and it was the Mountain, which is a fair amount better, as we see Donegan takes the Dive Down out of the hand with a Watery Grave on turn 1, and Skarren actually draws Island, and here's 2 Terramanders on the second turn.
Yeah, and that allows him to get some pressure on the battlefield here. Donegan's going to have his work cut out for him unless he has a pair of cheap removal spells.
No, it was just a cast down. Back on Skarren's side, there's that Mountain, and here's Enigma Drake.
All right, Playcrafter is a nifty way to get around Dive Down, but once the deck has 2 creatures on the battlefield already, it's not nearly as effective. But here, Dylan's just looking for literal anything that can interact.
And there was Ravenous Chupacabra, Skarren with the Dive Down. Thought about chalking the Chupacabra, though ends up not doing that, and he will do it on his own turn now that he has drawn and sees what his options were. Enigma Drake comes across, Donegan down to 13, and Terramander's the follow-up.
Yeah, another Terramander here, and just trying to keep the pressure on.
Donegan going to cast a J-Light Ranger. It's going to put a Hydroid Krasis in the bin, and he'll draw a land. Looks like Assassin's Trophy is hovering in the hand.
Yeah, and he's trying to figure out the best point to cast this because he doesn't want to expose himself to Spell Pierce or Dive Down, but he also wants to kind of wants to hit the Enigma Drake, but also kind of wants to wait for Skarren to activate the Terramander.
Skarren drew. The draw was Island, and he plays it because there's exactly 3 instants and sorceries in the graveyard. The idea was he could pump up the Terramander. It gets hit by Assassin's Trophy, but the Drake does connect. Donegan down to 8. And here's a big play. Hydroid Krasis X equals 4.
Yeah, and Jaylight Ranger chucking in for 3. The damage isn't irrelevant. The Hydroid Krasis as a 4/4 can check/trade with the Enigma Drake. Frank Skarren's going to need something like Lava Coil here to take care of it if he wants to keep attacking with his lone creature.
Yeah, and he's going to start with Chart a Course. Take a look at the top 2 cards of his deck. He's going to discard a Dive Down, and here's an attack with the Enigma Drake. Just going to trade because he has backup Enigma Drake.
Yeah, and this is where you really start to see the Sultai midrange deck take full control against something like Izzet Drakes. As long as they're able to draw those early pressure points and really interact with the Izzet Drakes deck on a fundamental level, whether that's with hand or creature, getting around things like Dive Down with Playcrafter, all of these things just result in, at some point, the Izzet Drakes will run out of stuff, and you won't, because you hit all your land drops with things like Jadelight Ranger and Branchwalker, where if the Izzet Drakes deck hits all their land drops, that means that they are flooding out quite a bit.
A huge swing for Donegan last turn. He had Vivian Reed. That cleared up the battlefield on the Skarren side. Now we're back on Donegan. Skarren just spent his turn spinning his tires. A bunch of cantrips cast. Not sure if we found anything, but we certainly didn't have mana to cast it. Now Donegan just going to work. Plussing Vivian, 6/6 Hydroid Krasis. Skarren does have Crackling Drake. That's gone immediately. Vivian Reed takes care of that. And here's an attack for 9.
Yeah, and I think this is just elementary for Donegan. 2 giant Hydroid Krasis, and Frank Skarren going to pack it in. No Star of Extinction, no chance to win that game.
Yeah, just a pretty significant runaway for Dylan Donegan here. Just 2 games where he's had a pretty significant battlefield. Skarren had some power, a lot of it in flying creatures, but just never